Good morning, students. Good morning, Mrs. Au. We are Group 3 presenting DRRR Module 6 Vulnerability and Disaster. This lesson illustrates why some industries are more vulnerable to hazard exposure and are more likely to be impacted by disasters than others. It will also explore many sectors working together to reduce community vulnerability and adjust after a disaster. By managing or minimizing exposure, the learners, like us, will be able to transform a highly sensitive sector into one that is less vulnerable. So guys, classmates, please get a 1/4 sheet of paper with name and section, label it DRRR Module 6 pretest on top of the letters of the best answers. Number 1. It refers to a serious disruption of the functioning community and losses in human life, material, economic, and environmental. A. Disaster. B. Disaster risk. C. Hazard. D. Vulnerability. Again, it refers to a serious disruption of the functioning community and losses in human life, material, economic, and environmental. A. Disaster. B. Disaster risk. C. Hazard. D. Vulnerability. Number 2. You currently live in a condominium. There was a super typhoon and the power went off due to damaged electric posts. But they have a generator, so the power supply is immediately restored. All of the following are the reasons why you are less vulnerable than other people living in the city except blank. A. Human activities affect the intensity of the typhoon. B. Availability of services during times of natural disaster. C. Ability to anticipate, respond, and adapt to current situation. D. Presence of facilities that can be used to respond immediately when needed. Number 3. All of the following can increase the level of vulnerability except blank. A. Very populated areas or community. B. Insufficient fund of relief operations. C. Inadequate facilities for immediate disaster response. D. Community provides accessible services and facilitates for response. All of the following can increase the level of vulnerability except blank. A. Very populated areas or community. B. Insufficient fund for relief operations. C. Inadequate facilities for immediate disaster response. D. Community provides accessible services and facilities for response. Number 4. NCR has a very high population density, making it more vulnerable to any hazard, like what happened during the lockdown, where all members of the family have no choice but to stay in a very small living space. To lessen the population density of NCR, the government proposed the blank. A. Libreng Hatid Probinsya. B. Gulayan sa Bakuran Program. C. Balik Probinsya, Bagong Pag-asa Program. D. Responsible Parenthood and Reproductive Health Act. Last item, number 5. The following factors can affect the level of vulnerability except blank. A. Capabilities of the authorities. B, human population, C, human population density, D, level of awareness of the community. The following factors can affect the level of vulnerability except blank. A, capabilities of the authorities. B, human population. C, human population density. D, level of awareness of the community.
After going through this module, you are expected to 1. Explain why some sectors are more vulnerable to disaster than others. 2. Describe how different sectors find ways on how to lessen vulnerability of the community. 3. Discuss how population density and capacity to mitigate and rehabilitate could affect the level of vulnerability of the different sectors. Four, deliver possible solutions in making the different sectors of the community to become less vulnerable. And lastly, 5, recognize the importance of knowing one's capacity and population density in community mitigation and rehabilitation.
Lesson 1. Sectors of society's vulnerability to disaster. This lesson explains why some sectors are more vulnerable to exposure to hazard and most likely to suffer greater disaster impact than others. It will also be discussed how different sectors find ways on how to lessen vulnerability of the community and how it adapts after the disaster. Factors affecting vulnerability of one's community. Level of vulnerability of an area or community can be assessed based on different factors. These factors can affect one another or can lead to other factors.
Population density near a hazard event. Population differs from population density. Population size is the number of individuals in a population. Population density is the average number of individuals per unit of area or volume. Population refers to the number of individuals inhabiting a particular space at the same time. If people are well distributed, there is less effect of disaster. Population density refers to the number of individuals living in an area in relation to the size of an area. If population density is high, it means that the number of individuals is high, but the space is very small. In that case, if fire broke out in that area, there is little space for the population to escape quickly and easily. So, crowded communities have higher vulnerability to hazard. Lastly, the primary consideration is not the population size, but the population density.
2. Capacity and efficiency to reduce disaster risk. Community that is less vulnerable has the capacity to reduce disaster risk because 1. It can provide accessibility and availability of services and facilities during and after disasters. 2. It has the ability to anticipate, adapt, and respond to possible disasters. Is it appropriate to say that the Philippines is less vulnerable to typhoon? Nowadays, our country has advanced technology to predict super typhoons, and several municipalities already provided evacuation centers to provide temporary housing for victims when disaster occurs.
So classmates, using your 1-4 sheet of paper from our pre-test, at the back of that, please answer the set of questions in our pre-test. in our post-test rather. Question number 1. What could be the possible reason why the urban region is more vulnerable to COVID-19 than the rural region? A. Urban regions have more population than rural regions. B. Rural regions have more population than urban regions. C. Rural regions have higher population density than urban regions. Letter D. Urban regions have higher population density than rural regions. Next question. Question number 2. Increased human population can sometimes result in blank. A. Lowered risk. B. Less exposure. C. Decreased hazard. Or D. Increased vulnerability. Next question. Number 3. Which of the following concepts does not fall under vulnerability? A. Absence of adaptive capacities. B. Exposure. C. Lack of coping capacities. Or D. Susceptibility. Next question. Number 4. Population density means blank. A. Number of households in an area in relation to the size of an area. B. Number of individuals living in an area in relation to the size of an area. C. Number of individuals inhabiting in a particular space at the same time. Or D. Number of households inhabiting in a particular space at the same time. Okay, next question. Why is it that Japan is less vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic than other Asian countries? A. They have more population. B. They have less population density. C. They have the capacity to do mass testing. Or D. They can provide sufficient numbers of PPE. Next question. Number 6. The following factors can affect the level of vulnerability, except A. Human population. B. Human population density. C. Level of awareness of the community. Or D. Capability and efficiency of the authorities. Okay, next question. Number 7. Factors affecting vulnerability are the following, except blank. A. Population density. B. Location of the community. C. Building codes and facility and policies. D. Occurrence of natural hazards. Next question. Number 8. What situation has the capacity to bring damages to lives, properties, and the environment? A. Element at risk. B. Hazard. C. Risk. D. Vulnerability. Number 9. In what situation will you consider a major earthquake as a non-disastrous one? A. When it happens in a faraway country. B. When it happens to less than 1,000 people. C. When it happens to less than 10,000 people. Or D. When it happens in an area without any people. Okay, next question. Last but not the least. Number 10. All of the following can increase the level of vulnerability except blank. A. Very populated areas or community. B. Insufficient fund for relief operations. C. Inadequate facilities for immediate disaster response. Or D. Community provides accessible services and facilities for response. For test 2, we will have it as enumeration round. From numbers 1 to 12, what refers to the number of individuals living in an area in relation to the size of an area? From numbers 1 to 12, what refers to the number of individuals living in an area in relation to the size of an area? Next number, numbers 13 to 14. It refers to a serious disruption of the functioning community and losses in human life, material, economic, and environmental. It refers to a serious disruption of the functioning community and losses in human life, material, economic, and environmental. Okay, last question for our Module 6 quiz. Number 15. If people are well distributed, there is blank effect of disaster. If people are well distributed, there is blank effect of disaster. Classmates, if you're done answering, please give your 1/4 sheet of paper to Just Rex. And that's it for our report for Module 6, Vulnerabilities of Disaster. I am Sharjul Oprah B. Kabungkag.
I am Carlos C. Godaltiver.
Rico Galvez.
I'm Shania Guhil.
And I am Trisha Mabayo.
And we are Group 3. Thank you for watching.